Commander Han Solo pressed his palms against the cold metal of the viewport, watching the alien fleet approach through the darkness of space. The Kethvar ships moved like floating crystals, each one catching starlight and throwing it back in rainbow patterns. They were beautiful in a way that made his chest tight with fear. "Sir, they're so much bigger than our ships," whispered Lieutenant Eugene beside him. Her voice shook just a little. The young officer had graduated from the academy only 6 months ago. This was her first deep space mission. Han Solo nodded slowly. The largest Kethvar vessel was at least 10 times the size of their flagship, the UES Harmony. It looked like someone had carved it from a single massive gem. Strange lights pulsed along its surface in patterns that hurt to look at for too long. The human fleet looked like toys in comparison. "Beautiful things can still kill you," Han Solo said, trying to keep his voice steady. He had been in space for 15 years, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this moment. The diplomatic corps had given them thick files about Kethvar culture and behavior, but the words on paper felt useless now. The bridge buzzed with quiet activity. Crew members moved between their stations, checking readings and updating systems. Everyone spoke in hushed tones, as if the aliens might somehow hear them across the void of space. The air recycling system hummed louder than usual, or maybe Han Solo just noticed it more because everything else felt so quiet. Admiral Suho's voice came through the communication system from the command ship. "All vessels maintain formation. Keep weapons powered down but ready. Remember, we came here to make friends, not enemies." Han Solo almost smiled at that. Make friends with beings who ruled half the galaxy through fear and force. The Kethvar Empire had been expanding for over 1,000 years, absorbing every species they encountered. Some joined willingly after seeing demonstrations of Kethvar power. Others were simply conquered and their populations relocated to serve the Empire's needs. "Sir, they're sending a transport," reported the communications officer. "They want to board our ship." "Let them come," Han Solo replied. There was no choice really. Refusing would mean war, and humanity was not ready for war with the Kethvar Empire. The alien transport ship looked like a piece of living crystal shaped into a rough triangle. It moved without any visible engines, gliding silently toward the Harmony's docking bay. Han Solo watched it dock with a soft vibration that ran through the ship's hull. Minutes passed. Then the bridge doors opened with their usual soft hiss, but the sound that followed was different. Footsteps, but heavier than human feet, with a strange ringing quality like someone walking on glass. The temperature on the bridge dropped several degrees, and frost began forming on some of the metal surfaces. 3 Kethvar entered the bridge and Han Solo felt his breath catch in his throat. They were massive, standing nearly 3 meters tall. Their bodies seemed carved from living crystal, with faces that were almost human but wrong in ways that made his mind struggle to process what he was seeing. Light bent around them in strange ways, creating shifting patterns of color that moved across their translucent skin. The leader stepped forward. When it moved, tiny chimes seemed to ring in the air around it. A small device attached to its chest began speaking in perfect, emotionless English. "You are the species designation human," it said. The voice from the translator was flat and cold. "We have observed your expansion into this sector of space. Your technology is primitive but adequate for basic functions." Han Solo stepped forward, trying to project confidence he did not feel. "I am Commander Han Solo of the United Earth Space Command. We come seeking peaceful contact and mutual understanding." The Kethvar leader tilted its head, and the light patterns on its body shifted to deeper, darker colors. "Understanding is unnecessary. You will submit to standard cataloging procedures. Your species will be integrated into the Empire according to established protocols. Your worlds will be assigned production quotas. Your population will be relocated as needed to serve Imperial needs." Eugene made a small sound beside him, something between a gasp and a whimper. Han Solo felt his hands clench into fists at his sides. "We would prefer to discuss terms of alliance rather than submission." The temperature dropped another few degrees. Ice crystals began forming on the viewport. The Kethvar's body colors shifted again, this time to what Han Solo somehow knew were angry shades. "There are no terms," the alien said through its translator. "There is only compliance or removal. We have encountered 347 species during our expansion. All have submitted or been eliminated. You will not be different." The other 2 Kethvar moved slightly, positioning themselves to flank Han Solo and Eugene. The movement was subtle but clearly practiced. These beings had done this before many times. "Your weapons are inferior," the leader continued. "Your ships are slow and fragile. Your population is small and scattered across only a few worlds. Resistance would be brief and pointless." Han Sol looked into the alien's crystalline face, trying to read some emotion there, but found nothing he could understand. This being saw humans the way humans might see insects, something to be catalogued and controlled but never truly considered as equals. "How long do we have to consider your offer?" Han Sol asked, though he already knew it was not really an offer at all. "Consideration is complete," the Kethvar replied. "Compliance begins now. Resistance is inadvisable." The alien turned and began walking toward the bridge doors, its companions following. The temperature began to return to normal, but the frost on the metal surfaces remained. As the bridge doors closed behind them, Han Sol and Eugene stood in silence. Finally Eugene spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do now, sir?" Han Sol continued staring at the doors where the aliens had disappeared. "Now we find out what humans do when someone tells us we have no choice." The morning sky over New Geneva was filled with smoke and the sound of screaming metal. Private Dong Hyun pressed his back against the twisted remains of what used to be the colony's main transport station. His hands shook as he held his rifle, but his eyes stayed focused on the street ahead where the Kethvar warriors moved like deadly glass sculptures come to life. 3 months had passed since the aliens gave humanity their ultimatum. 3 months of failed negotiations and empty promises. Now the Kethvar had come to collect what they believed was rightfully theirs. "Keep your head down," whispered Sergeant Mi-kyung from the rubble beside him. She was checking her ammunition for the 3rd time, her fingers moving with the practiced motions of someone who had been a soldier for 10 years. "They're bigger than us, but they're not ghosts." Around them, the colonists of New Geneva had turned into fighters overnight. The baker from Main Street held a hunting rifle with flour still under his fingernails. The school teacher clutched a makeshift spear fashioned from a metal pipe and a kitchen knife. Children who should have been playing in parks were now loading ammunition for adults who had never fired a shot in anger. The Kethvar had expected this to be simple. Their intelligence reports said humans were soft, peaceful creatures who would surrender quickly when faced with superior force. They had done this same routine on dozens of worlds. Show up with overwhelming power, demonstrate their weapons and watch the locals submit within hours. But something was different here. A Kethvar warrior stepped into view at the end of the street, its crystalline body catching the light from the burning buildings. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, with energy weapons built into its arms that could cut through steel like butter. Its companions spread out behind it in a perfect formation, just like they had on every other world they had conquered. The first shot came from somewhere to Dong Hyun's left. A crack of rifle fire that echoed off the damaged buildings. The energy bolt struck the lead Kethvar in the chest, and for a moment nothing happened. Then cracks appeared across its crystalline surface, spreading like a spider web. The alien warrior looked down at itself in what might have been surprise, then collapsed into thousands of glittering pieces. "They can die," breathed Mi-kyung. "They actually can die." The other Kethvar responded instantly, their energy weapons lighting up the street. Buildings exploded into fragments of concrete and metal. But the humans had learned something important in 3 months of preparing for this day. They had learned to hide. From every window, doorway and pile of rubble humans opened fire. Some had military weapons, but most carried hunting rifles, pistols and homemade devices. The colonists had spent weeks turning their peaceful settlement into a maze of fighting positions and hidden tunnels. Young Taehyun had been working in the power station when the attack began. At 18 he was studying to be an electrical engineer like his father. But today he was something else entirely. He had spent the morning rigging explosives to the main power grid, connecting them to a simple remote trigger he had built from spare parts. When the Kethvar war machines rolled over the buried power lines, Taehyun pressed the button. The explosion threw dirt and debris 100 meters into the air. 3 of the alien walkers, each the size of a small building, toppled over like toys. One of them crashed through the colony's medical center, its crystalline armor cracking under its own weight. "Did you see that?" gasped Haiwon, the colony's head nurse, as she pressed a bandage against the wound on her arm. Blood seeped between her fingers, but her eyes were bright with something that might have been hope. They're not invincible after all. The battle continued as the sun moved across the sky. The Kethvar had superior weapons and armor, but the humans had something the aliens had never encountered before. They refused to give up. When one position was overrun, the defenders would fall back to another. When their ammunition ran low, they threw rocks, bottles and anything else they could find. Private Dong Hyun watched a Kethvar warrior advancing down the street, its energy weapon charging for another shot. Behind the alien he could see more of its kind moving through the smoke and ruins. But he could also see humans moving through the shadows, getting into position for the next attack. Mi-kyung appeared beside him, her face covered in dust and sweat. Central Command is gone, she reported. But the South District is still fighting. And the militia from the farming settlements is moving in from the east. Dong Hyun nodded and checked his rifle. He had been a private for only 8 months, stationed on New Geneva because it was supposed to be a quiet assignment. He had joined the military to see the galaxy, not to fight aliens in the ruins of his own base. How long can we hold out? He asked. Mi-kyung looked around at the burning colony, at the human fighters moving through the rubble, at the Kethvar forces that seemed to be everywhere at once. As long as we have to, she said simply. The fighting continued for 6 more hours. When the sun finally set, New Geneva was a field of broken buildings and scattered debris. The colony was destroyed, its population scattered or dead. By any reasonable measure, the Kethvar had won. But scattered among the human bodies were the shattered remains of Kethvar warriors. Crystalline fragments that had once been living beings lay glittering in the firelight. For the first time in over 1,000 years of conquest, the apex predators of the galaxy had been made to bleed by their intended victims. Word of the battle spread through human space within hours. The message was simple and changed everything: they could be killed. Deep beneath the red surface of Mars, Chief Engineer Boram wiped sweat from her forehead as she stared at the broken pieces of Kethvar technology scattered across her workbench. The underground research facility hummed with activity day and night. Scientists and engineers worked in shifts, trying to unlock the secrets of their crystalline enemies. Boram had not slept properly in 3 days. Her eyes burned from staring at computer screens and alien crystal fragments under bright lights. But every hour of lost sleep was worth it if it meant saving human lives. The pieces of Kethvar armor and weapons they had collected from New Geneva and other battle sites were teaching them things the aliens never wanted them to know. Look at this, she called to Junicio, the weapons specialist working at the station beside her. He looked as tired as she felt, his usually neat hair sticking up in all directions. I ran the crystalline samples through every frequency test we have. Their body structure has a weakness. Junicio set down his tools and moved closer to her screen. The display showed wave patterns and numbers that would mean nothing to most people, but to him they told a story of victory and revenge. Their crystalline structure resonates at exactly 47.3 kHz, Boram explained, pointing at the data. If we can build weapons that generate sustained sonic pulses at that exact frequency. She paused, letting him reach the conclusion himself. Junicio's tired face broke into a dark smile. We crack them like wine glasses, he said, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. How quickly can we build something? Boram was already pulling up blueprints on her computer. I have designs for both handheld weapons and ship-mounted systems. Give me 2 weeks and a full production team. You have whatever you need, Junicio replied. The war factories on Luna are standing by. Far above them on the surface, in the Human Military Command Center, Captain Yijun studied the tactical displays that covered an entire wall. Each screen showed a different part of human space, and for the first time since the war began, most of the indicators were green instead of red. Fleet 7 reports successful defense of the Titan station, announced Communications Officer Hayri. Fleet 12 destroyed a Kethvar supply convoy near the Jupiter orbital platforms. Yijun nodded but kept his expression neutral. Victory in small battles was good, but the real war was just beginning. He had been studying Kethvar tactics for months now, looking for patterns and weaknesses. What he had discovered changed everything humans thought they knew about their enemies. Lieutenant Colonel Jina approached his station, carrying a stack of reports from the front lines. She was one of their best tactical analysts, someone who could see patterns that others missed. The reports from all combat zones show the same thing, she said, setting the files on his desk. When our people fight with real emotion, real anger, the Kethvar psions become confused and disoriented. Yijun looked up from his displays. Explain that. Jina pulled up chair and opened one of the reports. The Kethvar use telepathic abilities to coordinate their attacks and read enemy intentions. It works perfectly against every other species because they think in organized, predictable patterns. But humans? Humans get angry, Yijun finished. And when we get angry we stop thinking logically. Exactly. When a human soldier sees his friends die, when a colonist watches her home burn, they fight with pure emotion. Their minds become so loud with rage and grief that it overwhelms the Kethvar telepaths. Instead of reading human thoughts, the aliens get mental static. Yijun leaned back in his chair, processing this information. So our greatest weakness becomes our greatest strength. They've never faced anyone who gets stronger when they're angry, Jina continued. Every species they've conquered either submitted peacefully or died quietly. We do neither. We get mad and then we get dangerous. Intelligence Officer Sung-ho looked up from his workstation across the room. He had been monitoring communications from across the galaxy, tracking the movements of both human and alien forces. His job was to see the bigger picture, and what he saw was changing by the hour. "Captain, you need to see this," he called out. "I'm picking up communications from Kethvar space. Some of their subject species are starting to rebel." Yijun and Jina walked over to Sung-ho's station. The screens showed star maps with dozens of systems marked in different colors. Red for Kethvar controlled, blue for human space, and now yellow markers were appearing throughout the galaxy. The yellow markers are worlds where local populations have begun attacking Kethvar installations, Sung-ho explained. "Word of our victories is spreading. Other species are realizing that the Kethvar can be beaten." "How many systems are in rebellion?" Yijun asked. 17 confirmed, with reports of unrest in at least 30 more. "The Kethvar are having to pull forces away from our front lines to deal with uprisings in their own territory." Gina smiled for the first time in weeks. "Their empire is built on fear and the belief that they cannot be defeated. We've shattered that belief. Every dead Kethvar warrior is proof that they're not invincible." Yijun studied the tactical situation with new eyes. For 1,000 years, the Kethvar had been the hunters, moving through space to claim new worlds and new subjects. But hunters could become prey if the right predator came along. "Send word to all fleet commanders," he ordered. "We're changing from defensive operations to offensive strikes. It's time for Operation Shatter." "Sir?" Hairi asked from her communications station. "We're going to teach the galaxy something new," Yijun said, his voice hard as steel. "We're going to show them what happens when humans stop being the prey and start being the predators." The war was about to change in ways the Kethvar could never have imagined. Fleet Admiral Du-yun stood on the bridge of the U.S. Retribution, her hands clasped behind her back as she watched the most important battle in human history unfold before her. Through the massive viewport, she could see dozens of human warships moving into position around Keth Prime, the crystal world that had been the heart of alien power for over 1,000 years. The planet itself looked like a giant jewel hanging in space, its surface covered with towering spires of living crystal that reached up toward the stars. For centuries, no enemy force had ever come this close to the Kethvar homeworld. The aliens had believed it was impossible, that their defenses were too strong and their location too secret. They had been wrong about many things. "All ships report ready for final assault," announced Tactical Officer Min-jun from his station. The young officer had been promoted 3 times during the war, moving up quickly as older officers fell in battle. His voice was steady, but Du-yun could see the tension in his shoulders. "Broadcasting on all frequencies," reported Communications Officer So-young. Her fingers moved across her control panel, opening channels to every corner of the galaxy. "Every species with the technology to receive transmissions will see this." Du-yun nodded. This battle was about more than just defeating the Kethvar. It was about showing the entire galaxy that the age of Kethvar dominance was over. The footage being broadcast would be watched by billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. They would see Kethvar warriors, once considered the ultimate predators, falling back under relentless human attack. The psychological impact would be devastating to the alien empire. "Begin the assault," Du-yun ordered. The human fleet opened fire as one. Energy beams and projectile weapons lit up the space around Keth Prime like deadly fireworks. The planet's defensive stations, crystal structures that had protected the world for generations, began to crack and shatter under the concentrated bombardment. On the planet's surface, General Kyung-ho was leading the ground assault personally. He had insisted on being part of the first wave, despite protests from his staff officers. The general was 53 years old and had been fighting aliens for 2 years now. He had seen too many good soldiers die to stay safely behind the lines during the final battle. His dropship shook as it cut through the planet's atmosphere, defensive fire exploding around it like angry red stars. Through the small viewport, he could see the crystal spires of the Kethvar capital city growing larger. Each spire was hundreds of meters tall, connected to others by bridges of living crystal that formed complex patterns across the city. 30 seconds to landing, called the pilot over the intercom. Kyung-ho checked his weapon one more time and looked at the soldiers around him. They were all volunteers, men and women who had asked to be part of this final assault. Some were veterans who had been fighting since New Geneva. Others were newer recruits whose homes had been destroyed in later Kethvar attacks. All of them had the same look in their eyes, a mixture of determination and controlled anger that had become the signature of human warriors. The dropship touched down in what had once been a beautiful crystal garden. Now it was a battlefield, with human soldiers advancing between the alien structures while Kethvar defenders fired from concealed positions. The aliens fought desperately, but their tactics had not changed in centuries. They moved in predictable patterns, used the same formations their ancestors had used for generations. Humans, on the other hand, had learned to be unpredictable. Kyung-ho watched his troops spread out through the crystal spires, using techniques that would have seemed chaotic to any other species but made perfect sense to human minds. They moved in small groups, changing direction without warning, using the alien architecture in ways its builders had never intended. "General, we've taken the central spire," reported Colonel Jae-min over the radio. "Kethvar command structure is collapsing. They're requesting parley." Back on the Retribution, So-young looked up from her communication station with surprise. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Kethvar Planetary Command. They want to discuss surrender terms." Duyun's expression remained as hard as stone. She had spent months studying reports of Kethvar behavior on conquered worlds. She had read accounts of human colonies being harvested for slave labor, of families separated and children taken for alien experiments. The Kethvar had shown no mercy when they held the advantage. "Tell them it's too late for that," she said, her voice cold as space. "They should have thought of mercy before they started harvesting our colonies." Lieutenant Wu Jin, who had been monitoring alien communications throughout the galaxy, suddenly straightened at his station. His screens showed communication intercepts from dozens of star systems, and the pattern he was seeing made his heart race. "Admiral, you need to see this," he called out. "I'm detecting massive communications activity throughout former Kethvar space. Subjugated species are declaring independence from the Empire." Duyun moved to his station and studied the displays. Each screen showed a different sector of space, and the reports were coming in faster than Wu Jin could process them. 16 species have declared independence in the last hour alone," he reported, his voice filled with amazement. "The rebellion is spreading faster than we anticipated." On the main tactical display, Duyun could see the real-time status of the galaxy. Red zones that had been under Kethvar control for centuries were changing to yellow and green as local populations rose up against their oppressors. The empire that had dominated the galaxy for millennia was crumbling in real time. "The other species were just waiting for proof that it could be done," observed So-young. "We gave them that proof." Duyun nodded, watching as more star systems changed color on the display. The Kethvar had built their empire on fear and the belief that resistance was impossible. Once that belief was shattered, the entire structure collapsed like a house of cards in a windstorm. "Signal all fleets," she ordered. "Prepare for the final phase. It's time to finish this." The first light of dawn broke across the shattered remains of Fortress Eternal, the last stronghold of the Kethvar Empire. Colonel Minho walked slowly through the crystal ruins, his boots crunching on fragments of what had once been living walls. The morning air was still thick with smoke and the strange ozone smell that lingered after energy weapons had been fired. Around him, his soldiers moved quietly between the broken spires. Some tended to wounded comrades, wrapping bandages around burns and cuts. Others collected pieces of alien technology that the engineers would study later. Everyone moved with the careful exhaustion of people who had fought through the night and lived to see morning. Minho paused beside a massive crystal formation that had once been part of the fortress's main defense system. Now it lay in pieces, its inner light gone dark forever. He had been fighting the Kethvar for 3 years, ever since the attack on New Geneva had started this war. In all that time he had never imagined it would end like this. The surviving Kethvar had numbered less than 100 when the final battle began. They were the last of their kind in the entire galaxy, the final remnant of a species that had once counted its population in the billions. They could have surrendered. They could have asked for mercy or tried to negotiate some kind of peace. Instead they had fought to the very end. Minho had watched the last Kethvar warrior fall just as the sun appeared over the horizon. The alien had been badly wounded, its crystalline body cracked and leaking the strange fluid that served as their blood. But it had continued fighting, firing its energy weapon even as human soldiers closed in around it. They couldn't understand surrender. The concept of mercy was foreign to their minds. For 1,000 years, they had been the apex predators of the galaxy, the ultimate hunters who had never known defeat. When faced with extinction, their rigid culture could not adapt. That inflexibility had doomed them. Captain Eunhai approached through the ruins, her combat armor blackened and scorched from the night's fighting. She had been leading the assault on the fortress's eastern wall when the final Kethvar positions were overrun. Her helmet was tucked under her arm, revealing a face marked with exhaustion and something that might have been sadness. "Final report, sir," she said, her voice hoarse from breathing smoke and shouting orders all night. Our sensor teams have completed their sweep. No HFY life signs detected anywhere in monitored space. Minho nodded slowly. The words carried a weight that was hard to comprehend. An entire species, one that had ruled half the galaxy for centuries, was now extinct. They had been wiped out completely, every last one of them dead or dying in the ruins around him. It wasn't something to celebrate exactly. Genocide never was, even when it had been the only option left. The HFY had made it clear from the beginning that there could be no coexistence. They saw other species as resources to be harvested or obstacles to be removed. When humanity refused to submit, the only possible outcome was war to extinction. What about the other species? Minho asked. The ones that were under HFY control? Unhai pulled out a communication device and checked the latest reports from across the galaxy. They're asking what comes next. Representatives from 47 different worlds have sent messages asking if we're going to take the HFY's place as the dominant power. Minho looked up at the sky, where human ships moved in patrol formations through space that had been HFY territory for 1,000 years. The responsibility was staggering. Hundreds of worlds, billions of beings, all looking to humanity for guidance now that their oppressors were gone. Some of those species had been slaves for so many generations they didn't remember how to govern themselves. Others had been junior partners in the HFY empire, helping to oppress their neighbors in exchange for better treatment. All of them were now free, but freedom was not the same as safety or prosperity. They're scared, Unhai continued. Most of them have never known anything except HFY rule. They don't know what to do without someone telling them how to organize their societies. Minho walked to the edge of what had once been the fortress's main tower. From here he could see for kilometers in every direction. Crystal spires rose from the landscape like frozen trees, beautiful even in their destruction. This world had been the heart of an empire that spanned hundreds of star systems. Now it was a monument to the consequences of refusing to adapt. Tell them we're not conquerors, he said quietly, his words carrying across the morning air. Humanity didn't fight this war to build an empire. We fought because we were forced to fight. Unhai was taking notes on her device, but she looked up with a question in her eyes. Then what do we tell them we are? Minho thought about the question for a long moment. He remembered the first day of the war, when HFY ships had appeared over human colonies and demanded surrender. He remembered the desperate battles that had followed, the victories and defeats that had led to this moment. Humanity had never wanted to be conquerors or rulers of the galaxy. But they had proven to be something else entirely. Tell them we're just very, very good at ending things that need to end, he said finally. As the sun climbed higher in the alien sky, human ships continued their patrols through space that was now free from HFY control. Across the galaxy, species that had been enslaved for centuries were taking their first steps toward independence. The age of HFY dominance was over, ended not by negotiation or gradual change, but by complete extinction. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson that morning. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that doesn't look dangerous at all.